Welcome back, everyone, to the European VC podcast. Today, we are going to dive into the climate transition and the pressing need to get more women-led founding teams into our world of venture capital. As we all know, in 2024, all-female founding teams secured just over 1% of total climate tech funding, which, of course, is far too little. Mixed standard teams have got approximately 7%, which, if you do the math really quickly, you can also see is a total waste of talent. So for that reason, we're trying to set a focus here and talk to Carmel, as well as a series of very powerful women in the climate tech space. Carmel, first, introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you, Andreas. So I'm Carmel. I head the table. We are a community for co-investing in women-led climate ventures. We invite syndicates, funds, family offices, and CVCs to come and share deals that they're actively investing in. Pre-seed to A, where there's at least one female founder holding substantial equity. For us, that means that if there is a male counterpart, there's no more than a 60-40 split between them. Doing anything that has a direct and substantial positive climate outcome. So we're sector agnostic, climate positive. And we built this community as a non-commercial community to accelerate collaboration between investors, increase funding for women building in climate. And alongside that, we're building the Table Foundation, which will provide catalytic capital to accelerate the growth of the innovation through recoverable grants that will match the tickets that the investors in the community are doing in the deals shared.
Beautiful. Now on to our guest. Today, we're talking to Henrietta Moon, founder and CEO of Carbo Culture. Carbo Culture is a carbon removal company using high-temperature biochar to permanently remove carbon from the atmosphere and lug it away for hundreds to thousands of years. Henrietta brings a rare combination of perspectives. She's lived in the Valley. She's now building hard climate tech infrastructure in Europe, and she's doing it all while raising a family. Henrietta, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I just made a blunder, I'm sure, of simplifying what you do. Could you just tell everyone what Carbo Culture is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we build biochar factories that make biochar and also make energy in the form of gas. So a biogenic syngas that can replace natural gas, as well as, of course, the carbon removal, which is accredited at the tail end of activities. I'd say that biochar in general is such a huge climate tool. It's such a powerful way to move carbon from the atmosphere to different places because we tap into this natural carbon cycle where biomass, aka trees and crops, draw down hundreds of billions of tons of carbon dioxide annually, and of course respire it back into the atmosphere. So we kind of like hack that carbon cycle, take some of that biomass where nature has done the hard work of atmospheric carbon drawdown, and we take that plant matter, such as sawdust waste or crop waste, and turn it into a kind of charcoal-like carbon. So that locks away the carbon in a very, very safe and easy way to understand. So you can weigh it, you can send it to a laboratory, it's this black stuff. And eventually it ends up in open fields so that it's sequestered for a very long time. But we first use it in greenhouses to grow food in the EU. And so it's this kind of a holistic approach to many different things. And I have to say, just yesterday, it's such a good time to be recording this thing because just yesterday, the EU announced this incredible landmark deal, which is the first methodologies on carbon removal in the world. And biochar is one of those front runners. So it's such a huge stake in the ground. I can't quite describe it because there's this Brussels effect that when something happens in the EU, why would you set a different standard to that? So the standard is just going to get copied into other jurisdictions. So this means that carbon removal is well underway to regulated markets, which is a huge, huge milestone.
Just for those of us that now we kind of understand the technology and what's the purpose here, could you describe a bit the business model behind it? Who pays for what? Why is this priced well?
So basically, we build, not always own, but we build and operate these factories. They can be owned by partially our clients. Obviously, there's bank lending and project financing and so forth. But we basically build these factories that are next to greenhouses or greenhouse data center clusters, actually, in the Netherlands. And our first one has been already announced that we're in the process of engineering. And essentially, we sell the biochar into substrates, and substrates being the kind of mix of stuff where the tomatoes or the plants grow in the greenhouses, as well as all of our heat and power will be used in the greenhouse data center cluster as well. So we generate heat, electricity, as well as the biochar to be used in those areas.
This is one of those technologies that we've all kind of known would come at some point and would be industrialized and used. Where are we on that trajectory? And also, how much extra capital needs to be plowed into development before these are industrialized and in the world working?
It's kind of like an age-old technology. I mean, 5,000 years ago in the Amazon jungles, people were making biochar known as terra preta and using it for soil enhancement. So it's kind of like this mixture of ancient knowledge and we're kind of bringing it to a modern day. So humans have been doing this stuff for a long time, and traditional pyrolysis is super done and dusted around the world. And mostly today it's a global south play where you have smallholder farmers or other types of setups with excess biomass, turning it into biochar to make some credits and sell those on the voluntary market. But in that case, you don't really commercialize the other outputs. You're probably not using proprietary technology, and it's kind of a side activity of something else. And I think we're taking a completely kind of opposite end approach. Both of these are needed, by the way, so all good. But we're building industrial scale. So this is like 15 megawatts of energy is our smallest installment. What we're running in Helsinki today is 3 megawatts. So to put that in context, it's like a small power plant. And essentially, these installments are meant to be industrially robust and actually start paving the way for this new industry in Europe. And that's a completely different kind of beast altogether. I'd say you asked about the business model just now. I'd say that's one of the key differentiators with where we are as well, that we've kind of purposefully chosen to be sort of full stack in that we're a technology developer as well as our team is actually commercializing the output. So our team is ex-industry from the substrates market. So commercialized billions of euros into this market in previous jobs and so forth. So kind of like taking all of those things together, we are able to then start building a pipeline of these projects, start taking over the market and start plowing the way in that sense. So there's a lot of different approaches to this, but we're kind of, chose that way.
In this competitive world, when you're thinking of this business model, how are you, and with the geopolitical issues and the fact that it's much harder to talk climate today, how are you thinking of your pricing model and the business model from the perspective of your clients?
To these kind of like vibe shocks, I'd call them, because just to make it clear, like the problem has not gone away. Like we're still headed to like over 2-degree warming, which will be catastrophic for crops, for infrastructure, for life as we know it on the planet. So basically, like, let's put that in there first. The problem hasn't gone away, but I agree the vibe kind of has shifted, as in like the US is closing more climate funds now than it was opening in 2022, which is pretty shocking, right? So definitely there is this kind of a dip in the market. We're quite buffered because we have these other revenue streams, like energy is real. You still need power, you still need heat, food is real. You can't survive without eating. So all of these things are just so cornerstones of the economy, and we have revenue streams which are long-term offtakes, de-risks, and so forth. So that's buffering us quite a lot. And now when it comes to carbon removal, that's obviously the one kind of revenue stream or the market that has been kind of ebbing and flowing and really dependent on a couple of big buyers. And that's super risky from anyone's standpoint. But now, again, with this yesterday's announcement from the EU, this has been work of years culminating to this thing. They just announced this voluntary standard on carbon removals, which means that every EU buyer can now look at that standard and make sure that they comply with it and not be afraid of greenwashing, not be afraid of some kind of people coming after them for doing something in climate, right? There's been this paralysis of action because of the vibe. And I feel like now the kind of road is open. And if you follow this stuff, you're not going to get in trouble for doing that. So I think Slowly, we're unlocking those challenges in the market. And again, the voluntary market today is like 1 billion. The regulated market just in the EU is around 800 billion. So you can quickly see how like these steps are just inching the way to where it's actually going towards. So momentary blip, but trajectory is super clear.
Can I ask you, Henrietta, is there a market for your solution completely independent of regulatory requirements? Meaning that, is this process just from the high quality biochar you get out of it and its qualities for growing food afterwards, is that a market in its own, or will you always need to have a carbon removal part in the business model as well?
I'll answer that in 3 ways. So first of all, yes, the biochar is useful on its own. So growing media today is comprised of a bunch of different biomasses like peat or cocoa coir or wood chips. Some of these have long supply chains. Some of them have supply chain shocks. So actually bringing in a material that's made in the EU, that's safe for food production, and so our biochar is the only one so far that has qualified for, there's probably 1,000 different metrics that have to go right. But basically, by qualifying this material there, we're actually helping to bring new materials into this huge growth market. High-tech agri in itself, so greenhouse growing, is growing at a pace of 6 to 8% like annually everywhere, because everybody's urbanizing, you need more food as the population is growing. Climate shocks mean that you have to grow it under controlled environments, and you just get more yield per square meter in these greenhouses. So that's why the Dutch greenhouse business is like dominating in growth right now. So definitely, yes. Then to your question of, can we exist in a non-regulated or in the absence of any regulation? In theory, but I think it's a theoretical question, because there is no country on the planet that doesn't have regulatory environments, right? Whether it's Canada, whether it's the US, or whether it's Europe, there's always going to be some regulation that you have to go by. And especially energy and food being such close topics to heart in kind of like national interest and food safety and all kinds of stuff, like those are going to be regulated environments wherever we go, and we just have to play with what's around and what's regulated. But yeah, definitely. I mean, they are giving us tailwinds because everybody wants to get rid of natural gas, especially the imported stuff, and so forth.
I'm hearing that there's a lot of local resilience play in the conversation now, both from the soil enhancer perspective as well as the energy perspective. Is that a new perspective that you've kind of seen that it works in the existing narrative, or just curious if it was something that drove you from the beginning?
In the beginning, I have to say, I don't know if we know anything today, but we knew nothing when we started. And definitely the very, very, very basic concept of like, our soils are impoverished. We need to put more carbon there. We have too much carbon in the atmosphere. It should go in the soil. Great, makes sense, right? Now, how you make that into a business model is a lot more complicated. And we're humbled to be starting to work with the high-tech agriculture space, because it is so precise, it's so exact, they know exactly what they're doing. And in the end of it, I mean, biochar is a valuable material in that, in the mix of many other materials. And then at the end of its life, it can go to open field agriculture to enrich the soil there. Like, the best thing that you can do is to use the material for something useful and then park it somewhere where it's going to be sequestered for a long time, instead of some other type of play where you just kind of put biochar in a cave or something to just lock it away. But why wouldn't you first use it as a valuable material? So this cascading use is kind of like, I think, the principle that we're driving. I am learning every day, but luckily my team is a lot smarter than me. We have one of our scientists on board has worked in this industry for over 30 years, understands kind of everything down to the root hairs and what they need of these plants and so forth. So food and soil is like a different galaxy. When you start diving in, you see how little you actually know.
clearly you have a mixed capital stack. You've raised $27 million today, mix of venture capital and public funding and grants. I'd love to ask you a bit about that mix, kind of how you balanced the need for both grants and of course also the non-public funding, VC and also debt.
When we started out, it was kind of like there was a lot of thinking that, oh, we'll just build all of this fast on equity and so forth. I think that kind of bullishness has gone. And I think there's a broad acknowledgement that kind of like we're building real world infrastructure. You just have costs. You can't do it without the proper engineering for piping, for safety, for this and that, right? But that's the beauty of it as well, that it is infrastructure. Then it's so real. The revenues are real. But in any case, the approach is very different to a normal VC case or anything like that. So right around the first factories at scale or at commercial scale, you have to start heavily blending in different forms of financing because you just have a different return profile for the assets. And so eventually you get to project financing, like how hospitals, bridges, everything are built today from wind farms and so forth. That's great. But in between, there's this de-risking period where you have to start bringing in government grants, anything that you can bring in sort of debt from government-backed sources and so forth. And in Europe, it is really strong. I mean, if you look at a lot of the European funds, they are largely backed by the EIF and so forth. So Europe has a very, very strong role in the kind of funding scheme here. Yeah, and I think the Americans also see that as a super, super strong point for infrastructure making.
It's a whole other skill set to think of how you're going to finance the company that you're building than thinking of how to do the innovation, build it, implement it, and do the practicalities of it. Founders building in climate, building in real world solutions, where would you recommend, and you're heading into your next raise as well, and going into industrialization and commercialization, which is a whole other scale and size of fundraise. What are you learning now and you learned before that other founders should kind of keep in mind when they're thinking of structuring their seed rounds, A rounds, and going forward from there?
For our line of business, especially working super closely with what your clients want. I mean, there's an age-old wisdom, but those revenue streams and proving that somebody actually wants what you're making is so critical, especially when you're trying to front load the financing of infrastructure. So showing that there's a buyer for the next 10 years for the stuff that we're going to start making is critical and imperative in this line of business. I'd say that that's number one. And I'd say that you brought up something really interesting, which is like how to transition a company from this early stage to this like growth stage. And that is so key in your team and the mentality and so forth, because early stage startups are like the technical R&D, figure it out, optimize it, change parts, always making it better and making it work and scaling it and so forth. But at some point you have to be like, great, now we're going to start replicating the same thing that we've been doing and making it really boring. No more changes all the time, no more new stuff. And that's like a totally different mindset where you have to then kind of get the team to go to like, hey, now we're going to start scaling this thing. It has to be super boring. And those are like different forces sort of pulling it, let's say.
I think you make a really great point here, because one thing is the communication to your team and getting your team to transition there. There's also the fact that you go from, when you raise equity, you're talking pie in the sky talk, and you're saying we can 100x this. It's going to be in a massive opportunity. There's also a very big
infra doesn't want to hear that.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
like,
but when
no, one exit.
Exactly. Can you talk a bit about that mindset shift, and also the fact that oftentimes you are running an equity round at the same time as you're also talking to the infra guys, and you need to run two completely different narratives, and how do you split
in
that?
a new market? Yeah.
Can you talk about how you navigate that? Because that's what I am seeing when I meet a lot of hard tech founders. They're struggling a bit with distinguishing between those two stories. When they talk to VCs, it's one language. When they talk to the people that are meant to basically fund their CapEx, That's a completely different story.
And maybe I'll just add on top of that the question of offtakes, that we really want to treat them as actual revenue, but most investors don't yet. And so how do you add that into these narratives?
To take maybe the second question first. So how we mature projects is like super classical infrastructure style. So basically you mature all the contract suite at the same time, because you don't want to have like a site without the offtakes or offtakes without the permits, or you don't want to be liable for stuff before you can actually produce it, etc. So it just has to kind of mature at the same time. And then one day you kind of sign everything, figuratively, so to say, so that it's like kind of buttoned up at the same time. And that's project development. So you're always looking at multiple different buckets, but as a startup, at some point, you probably have to lock in like one choice. And there, actually, the revenues are super key, because to fund the thing that you're going to build, I mean, funding the construction and the kind of like deployment time is the riskiest period. And most likely you're going to need venture funding for your first couple of facilities for those. And so there, it's really imperative to show that, hey, the revenues are coming from this sturdy off-taker who has a lot of bandwidth to take these, whatever we're producing in. They're not going to back out at the first sight of trouble. They're going to be there. They're financially sturdy. Like all that stuff has to be there, because we've seen in climate tech where off-takers start being flaky, that just chips away at the confidence at the top co and the mother co and the projects. So yeah, revenues really, really key, and work with those clients. Make sure that they're on board as well. They're almost like partnering with you in the beginning. And then the kind of equity story and the capex, it's how you have to start thinking about your business, which is like, what's going to be the role of your business? Are you going to be like super duper heavy, like own and operate everything? Maybe if you have some kind of like super capex light thing, maybe that's possible, like a battery play or something like that. Maybe you can kind of roll them out and have some kind of a service fee and own them all or whatever. And then you have like different kinds of infrastructure like us, which is like, not as expensive as a wind park, but not as cheap as a couple of mil battery somewhere. So there you're probably going to start working on some kind of a mixed version of how you're going to fund these in the future, so that your top co, which is where you're gathering the equity to, doesn't have to take on that heavy load, and you don't have to think of fundraising billions into the top co, which is difficult. And so I think there's two different flavors. But again, as founders, like I'd say spending too much time with infrastructure financiers when you haven't gotten a couple of commercial plants up and running is maybe good for education, but not good for a lot of other things, because there's like super deep diligence and all that kind of stuff. And you really don't want to waste time on that prematurely, because they're just going to want to see de-risked technology. Minimum TRL level is 8. You can check the NASA technology readiness level, kind of like real world stuff, operating, making revenues. That's what they want to see. Then you can go and talk to all the banks in the world and start kind of like competitive bidding on who's going to give you the best offer for a loan and so forth. But like bird by bird, you have to kind of like acknowledge where you are as well, in which stage.
I'd love to ask you, you've raised equity from both the US and from the Asian world, Singapore, and then you also have from Europe. I'd love to ask you a bit about navigating as a founder, raising globally. Why did you do that? What are maybe the pros and cons? Do you see differences in what's valued slash the narratives that need to be applied, that type of thing?
I think every fundraise, every founder, every board is very different. So, like I have to also give credit to our Nordic family offices and to Lifeline Ventures, who backed us in our very early days before we had any, like, there was no regulated market, there was no carbon removals. Like it was really, really, really early. So those are the kind of like family offices and stuff like that, they can make those bets. So they are really important for you, and a good lifeline sometimes when you need them. Then True Ventures, incredibly instrumental, and especially, strong VC with conviction. They don't need to follow others. They can make decisions on their own and so forth. So sturdy, amazing investors, top tier, like 100% top tier. And then Gen Zero, who came from Singapore, is a later stage investor. So they're very different flavor again. So we had like the Nordic early stage family offices and very a small VC in the scope of things, then the kind of like top tier VC name from Silicon Valley. And then you bring in the kind of heavy duty fund, which is a 4 billion decarb fund. All of those have a very different role and they can help you in very different ways. So I'd say that that's one thing to consider. And then the other thing is just the people. Like at the end of the day, you build a business, you build it with people. Are those people there because they believe in the mission? They can see the future. They're going to help you pave the way, form that new market, close those deals, understand the value and so forth. Or, how are they going to be allies on that journey?
Was there a strategy behind picking from 3 continents, so to say, versus take the money where it is from good people?
I think it's more the latter. We actually got introduced to both of the later stage investors through other investors. And after some digging in, they were just like recommended by other founders and so forth. That's something that I would always do, check with other founders if funds are great to work with. And so I think once all those things are ticks in the box, there's no reason to kind of limit yourself. And of course, Southeast Asia is super interesting for the future for us as well.
If you're ready, I would love to go to public funding and ask a question there, because obviously every company has the same issues around having, most in the carbon space or in the climate space, are also raising significant public funding. However, timelines can be a bit difficult to navigate, can also be quite difficult to even figure out where you're really eligible and where you're not. Can you talk a bit about navigating that morass?
The EU has obviously great funding instruments, as well as there being local kind of government level instruments for companies. And I think it's super important to understand those from an early day. Of course, your customers are the number one thing that you need to crack and kind of like make sure that you're making value with whatever your core proposition is. But then start working with the agencies as well. Like how are we gonna scale this? What are the steps? What are like benchmark companies that have gotten funding? Are there other founders that are a bit further along that you could ask how they did, XYZ funding with the public space and so forth and so on. And of course, there's like grant writers and so forth around. You can spend a lot of time and money on those as well. It's not a one size fits all. I think for infra, like getting a government-backed loan or something like that is just so important because you don't have to raise it as equity. It's like kind of soft lending in some forms, super, super, super important. And those are really the things that are needed to scale up new industries. We had like one person on our team in the early days who was just tirelessly pushing at these things and got quite good at it in the sense of like understanding what is eligible, what can we go for, what are benchmarks, how can we pave the way for ourselves, and then couple that with the equity story, because often they need to go hand in hand, as in like this lending won't be unlocked until your next equity comes in or whatever like is the setup. So yeah, ideally have somebody on your team. If it's not you, then have somebody who has total ownership of that and is pushing that forward.
It's something that we hear over and over again, the amount of time, energy, and dedication that is required in order to find these grants, open them, report to them, continue them. There's the stages of the grant funding in the really early research side, and then in the beginning of the scale-up side. Were you doing grants for both of them? And if you did them in the beginning, how did you decide to allocate the very small capacity of somebody from the team in order to do that?
Yeah, we even like won some pitching prizes from a Swiss bank that was 10,000 euros, like you name it. We've, any cash in is great, right? So we built our Finnish pilot plant with the EU EIC funding. Of course, it's not 100% funding, but it's a substantial part of that funding. And that's like super straightforward. It's CapEx, it's, hours, it's proving your technology through one of these risky stages in the technology readiness, and also opening new markets with that. So with the work that we did at R3 in Helsinki, for example, we've opened this high-tech agri space, the greenhouse market, as well as green steel. So our partners or test partners, SSAB and Ovako, already made melt of steel, where they basically put 100% of our biochar instead of coke and made actual green steel that made into actual automotive parts that were commercially used. So we've used that pilot not just for the technology de-risking, but actually to open those markets as well and work with clients. And I think that's the kind of like catalytic impact that these kind of grants can have, especially when you're maturing technology and maturing new markets at the same time. So really, really important. And I think that's also important to the host country or region, wherever you are, because obviously you're making new IP, you're making new business, you're driving new kind of fundamentals in every direction. So that's what I think every country needs.
So the mixed capital, I think you have the most mixed capital stack example that we can see of. So from very early stage competitions and grants to family offices and local ventures to international scale and growth scale investors, as well as government funding. Within all these stakeholders, what would be your one wish that they all knew in order to make the process easier?
Yeah, for the next fundraise, more later stage funds in Europe would be great, obviously, or kind of like around the Series B, but that's fine. I think my one wish for the next sort of leg of the journey is to continue to have a really functional board. I think that's something that just no founder can overlook. So really, you want your board there to be supportive, to open doors, to work with you, not just kind of like reporting style, but actually like strategizing, creating leadership with you, and then spend a little bit of time on reporting and admin and everything that a board needs to do. But really to have a driving force in the company. Like you have these amazing people who might be later stage investors or independents or people from your industry. You need to use them, and that's the best thing that a company can have, is like a super driving board, in addition to the capital, obviously. But I think that's something to think about, especially when thinking about who you're adding to the cap table. Is it strategics? Is it VCs? Is it some kind of family? Or what is the kind of mix in the next stage? And I think that'll be an ever evolving thing, honestly. The climate is still kind of early days in many ways. I think it's like first day always. And looking forward, there's still a lot of work to do to build these markets and so forth. So yeah, can't say everything's super established yet, but working on it.
What would you say are the core principles for a good functioning board, or for how you would wish that the board functions, or like the principles that you would say board members should adhere to?
Yeah, I'd say high trust. So high trust that everybody's acting in the best interest for the board and for the company. So low ego, high trust, really coming in informed, ready to work, ready to see the new day of the company, and in good and bad. That's kind of like super, super critical. But yeah, high conviction, high trust, low ego, I'd say are kind of traits that you want in the boardroom. And they're, yeah, don't get stuck on just reporting or something like that. Just work together, I'd say, is the thing. And I think there as well, in my experience, this might be different for everybody, but like the size of the room sometimes does matter, like how much stuff you get done, so to say, or like how juicy the conversation is, and sort of really, really down to the core. And it's good to have those times in there as well, to make sure that it's like one team, the board is one team as well, when inevitably something will come up.
How do you as a CEO ensure that? It's one thing is the size, but another thing is what happens between the board meetings. How do you prepare to make sure that you go into a meeting where you can be productive?
Yeah, I mean, I've done, a thousand things wrong, and I guess that's how you learn. But I'd say that building trust is a lot about communications. So kind of like comsing, whether it's good or bad, just communicate. And I'd say also that you and your team should come up with kind of like what you guys see the best path forward being, and then take it to the board and discuss and so forth, especially when it's big topics. Obviously, day-to-day management doesn't like, there's like 1,000 different things that you're working on all the time as a company, and there might be like two or three that you think the board should actually pay attention to. So bring those to the board and use them, and it'll kind of create this trust as well between people that, hey, okay, you guys got it on those other stuff that's happening, right? Don't need to interfere there, but like, let's talk more about these couple of things in depth and see what we should do. I think trust and trust building, communications, being active there is like super important.
I think towards wrapping up, I think we've been talking about so many different aspects, from the technology building itself to thinking of your funding to thinking of your board and your management. But you're doing all of this while having a young family. How does that work? I mean, I have my own young family. I think Andrea has that too. But how are we doing? How does it work for you? How do you?
Struggling every minute. No. Yeah,
The
I
first
mean,
reaction is always the true reaction.
yeah,
Struggling
yeah,
every
yeah.
minute. That's the truth of it.
I'll go with
No, I
struggling.
mean, sleep-wise, I'm deprived, but life fullness, I'm, overjoyed. Babies are the best. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people ponder this, and it's somehow still a taboo, which I don't understand. It's like such a important thing. I mean, men have, kids at work all the time. So it's brilliant to be a parent and a CEO. I would recommend it to everybody. I think you just manage through it. And I mean, I asked one of our angel investors who has 4 kids and is a CEO, I asked them, like, how do you do it? And they said, like, get all the help you can, whether it's grandparents, a community, or if you can hire help, great, do it. Like, you don't, like, there's this notion in society that we need to like raise kids alone somehow, or like, it's nonsense. Your kids don't want to be with you all the time. They want to be around other children, around their grandparents, around other people as well. So there's no reason to kind of like think that you need to do everything alone. I mean, sure, there's like the incredible privilege of motherhood, and the incredible empowering that brings is incredible, but you don't have to do it alone. So kind of like, don't wait, just do it. You'll get through it.
And I mean, it's just a few more balls in the air, right? Some will drop, some you'll pick up along the way.
Yeah, but it's what it like it is something that you shouldn't even think about from the concept of work. It is something that brightens your every day in the morning and in the evening, and it's life, It's something beautiful why we live for. And I think as a founder as well, you shouldn't just be do like, yes, there are times when you need to push and crush and like do, all kinds of things, typically in the early days where you just kind of have to have that incredible momentum push to get something off the ground. But if you're so consumed by it all the time, it might not be that good a thing for the long run. So I think that you become stronger as a person and as a leader if you have something else in your life as well. Then, the work obsession, which we all are obsessed about. We're all workaholics, right? That's okay. But have something else in your life that brings joy as well, whether it's kids or something else. I think that makes you stronger as a founder.
I'm thinking a bunch here because on the one hand, I agree. And on the other, I say, we also got to be very honest about it not being a walk on roses.
I wouldn't have started a climate company 10 years ago if I wanted that. But yeah, it's not cushiony. Like, maybe you don't need to be, if you want something cushiony, don't be CEO and parent, or maybe not CEO.
And I think that it's just, so I can describe it from my situation, right? We got a son that needed more care than a typical one. That meant that I needed to make very hard calls on work-life balance. had I raised venture money for EUVC, I would not be one of the core people today. Like, because I cannot run 60, 70 hours per week. I cannot fly every week and still meet my parental obligations. And building EUVC, like the natural thing you wanted to do is fly around all of Europe, if not also Europe, between Europe and US.
That's good for the climate that you're not flying.
Yeah. Well, and for that reason, I do think that like my core advice to a person that I love and is a good friend of would always be, and this is not a politically well looked upon advice, I think, but it's really, before you have children, just beware that this may have very big impact on where you're headed in life. And there's no going back. Like, so you just got to go through those different scenarios and say, am I ready to deal with this? And it might be, okay, I'm going to drop out of the company. It might be, I won't be the leader of the company. It might be, well, I will be, but my kids, I have already made the agreement with my parents or whatever, that they're probably going to be the core person very close to me and my spouse, or however that is. And I just think that that is one of the things that many of us dare not say, that there are potential very hard trade-offs that needs to be made.
I have to say I agree, but on the other hand, life is full of surprises, and you never know what surprises will come. And you can have a child that needs less attention and more attention, and all of a sudden you can have a sick partner or a sick parent or be sick yourself, or there are so many unknowns in our life that I think we
You can't control it.
And as long as you know that you do your best, and yeah, there are points in life that you do need to make a sacrifice, and sacrifice look different at different times. But I think what's beautiful about founders is that they initially know that they're going to take upon themselves way more than any reasonable person can. And what is fair for us is to be honest about where do we reach capacity, and also knowing that there's no perfect. So some things fall between the cracks. Sometimes it's the family stuff, sometimes it's the work stuff, and we just push ahead and try and make it work, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Andreas, for sharing. And I can totally relate a bit to that story. And I think as a founder, there's a few concepts that were like really valid when I was like, when it was like 2012, kind of like this notion that like crushing it is the only tool a founder has. I think we're luckily a little bit past that. So first of all, like as a founder, you need to have a strong LT or need to have a strong team. Like you just can't be doing everything alone. Otherwise you're the bottleneck. And I think really like owning that is like one thing, obviously at a later stage of the company, but in any case, like that's one thing to just get help at work and at home. Like you don't need to do everything alone. And then the other thing is that I think like Aura and these like wonderful companies have brought this cognizant like understanding that you need to sleep, you need to like eat and exercise to be functional at work. Like you're not a machine. You can be a machine for 2 weeks, sure, but then you can't be a machine for 10 years. Like you gotta be kind of like fresh and on it when you're like discussing like, I don't know, hundreds of millions of investment or something. You can't just be like kind of not showered for 3 days, crushing it type. Like, no. So you just gotta kind of like also grow up with the company. And I think, yeah, getting help is like key. And that doesn't mean that you're less powerful as a leader to have like other people building it with you.
I think you're absolutely right. And clearly, you can't plan your way out of everything. My message to my friends is just be ready, know what you're headed into, think ahead, whether now is the time or if what needs to be done, what conversations need to be had, especially co-founder conversations as well. Those are incredibly important. I'm seeing many co-founders where those conversations have not been as transparent as maybe it would have been helpful. Yeah, so it's just knowing, like, paying your dues, so to say, before making a life-changing decision and change. Just make sure you've kind of circled everyone in and everything is ready.
Yeah, and I think piggybacking on Carmel's message, you can't always plan everything. Like, you don't know if you're going to have a kid now or in 5 years, even if you start trying today. Like, you can't plan everything. And as a founder, I could not control 2 Trump presidencies, 2 wars, COVID, and something else flying at me. You got to deal with it. Things change, and you just can't control it all, I think.
And Andreas, I love that you raise it. You make sure to have this as part of the conversation with founders. I think it's so important to talk about the fragility of life and the personal challenges of being founders and life decisions within it, and we don't talk about it enough. And to your point, I think it's so much about communication, right?
Yeah,
To
trust
your
building.
co-founder, talk to your life partner, talk to your family, because and it's for children and it's for every other thing. And talk to your board, because these founders are building in climate and in general really important innovations that we have to see come to life, and we cannot go through life alone, and we have to have communication as a core part. I always say, when you start with your co-founder, make sure you know how you're going to separate. Like, before you get married, see how your divorce will look like, because once you have the hard conversations, it's really easy to go forward. So have your prenup on every kind of situation you're at. It will give you confidence of who you're walking the path with.
And actually mentioning partners, like, whatever stage in life you're at, you might have a partner at home or not, but that home partner is equally important to have high trust with, because they are going to make sacrifices for you, whether you want it or not. There's going to be holidays where you're like, just one call, this kind of stuff where you're going to disappoint them, unfortunately, like again and again. And they are like also kind of building it with you, because they're allowing this space that might look a little bit different than a different job would. And that's the stuff that also needs to have high trust, high conviction at home.
That's the foundational principle behind alimony. We do have someone who is paying the bill for us building a career or a company.
And as somebody that has a bit older kids, I'll just say that as they grow, also with your children, because they learn to admire you and see you as role models, and they don't need to think that everything is easy. And my kids are now slowly growing, and having them to be partners as well is a huge thing.
Carmel, Henrietta, thank you so much for taking the time. We went a little bit over time. I guess the final conversation was interesting and important to all of us. Thank you all for tuning in today. I'm so happy that we got this conversation done. We had a bit of tech issues the very first time around, but now we made it. Thank you, Henrietta. Thank you, Carmel.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much.